Yep, George. Game.
Okay.
Okay, so should we do like the introduction thing?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So,
Holiday Park.
thank you all for joining us today. We'll go ahead and do introductions with everybody who's on. So I'll go first. My name is Jeb Reese. I work at Intin, Indiana, and I manage the land bank there, as well as doing some things with affordable housing development and hanging out here with KI whenever I can.
Hey everybody, I'm Alvin with Kheprw. Excited to be here with you and talk about nerdy books. That is all. I'm feeling pretty good today. I'll pass it to Wild Style.
Hey, what was the question again?
Go ahead, Jim.
We were just asking you to introduce yourself.
Oh, no check-in question?
Okay.
What's up, man?
Y'all switching it up.
Wild style.
What's up, man?
Keep Alvin honest, man. I think the money's got him compromised.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I missed the check-in question. I was like, what? I'm Wild Style. I'm over in the near Northwest or Unwa or Riverside or whatever people want to put it on the map as today.
Okay, and the check-in question. Let's say the most interesting. Want to do the most interesting place you've ever been or visited?
Definitely Germany.
Where?
Germany.
Germany?
Mm-hmm.
Why was that?
I don't know. I mean, it just was, it still looked like how you said it was supposed to look. It looks like like a Disneyland, basically.
All right, and Wild Style, your color and number today? How you feeling, 1 to 10?
I'm a 7, and the number. I mean, the color is probably light gray because we haven't seen any sun today.
Should we pass it to Dawn?
Yes, Dawn Lindsay. Color green, number 8. I'm with Intent, Real Estate Development Director. And a place I really enjoyed seeing was definitely East Germany. Just seeing the difference between East and West. And also being able to be a part of the economic revitalization of the East after the wall came down. So.
And then Erica.
Hi, my name is Erica Foch. I work for the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. I am about an 8 today, color blue. And then I was an interesting place I've been, right? Gosh, so many places to choose from. I think Romania has been one of the most interesting places. I didn't get to spend that much time exploring, but it left an impact.
What's Romania like?
So I was over there building with Habitat for Humanity, and so we spent a lot of time with like other local builders, and it was interesting because you didn't like have to speak the same language, but you communicated just with hand gestures and motions, and you were working together. And so it's really interesting. But the architecture there is just beautiful, and the history is so amazing. We went to Dracula's castle, and the doorways were like 5 feet tall because back then they were so short that was like tall enough for the tallest gentleman to walk through. So it was just really a picturesque place with a lot of great people and food, and it was just a really great experience. So
Awesome. Thanks, Erica. And I'll come back and give my number. I'm feeling like an 8. sea green. And my favorite place I've been has definitely been Thailand, which is where my dad's originally from. So I studied abroad there and then went back and worked there for a year after I graduated. And just one specific experience, like we stayed in a lot of like different like rural communities and villages where they were transitioning back to organic agriculture or protesting dams, mines, or other projects. But the most fun part was just hanging around with the family, and I learned to like cook a little bit, like the mas or the moms like would just like show us how to cook a little bit. So I learned how to make a dish called like kai lakui, which means son-in-law's eggs. It's like deep fried like hard-boiled eggs in like a tamarind sauce and like it's delicious. Yeah.
Nice.
And like shallots and peppers and stuff.
That sounds good.
Yeah, that was good.
And then I guess I'll wrap up. Today, I think I'm probably a 7. Color is yellow. And most interesting place I think I've been is, and this is, different from everybody else's, but probably Cincinnati. And I say this, bear with me. I really think, I've been to Germany, and, I think Germany's really interesting and stuff, but the work that's being done in Cincinnati in terms of like, the culture that's there, and just like the fact that people don't seem to talk about it, but it, is like a true urban place. I love visiting there. It's so interesting. So anyways, just putting a little USA love out there, I guess. Okay, so whether you've read this book or you've heard about the book, the Death and Life of Great American Cities has really had an impact on the urban planning profession, for decades now. And one of the things that's really interesting about it to me is that it is really a book about opinions, right? These are mostly observations that Jane Jacobs make, and there's not really a whole lot of data in the book. So I wanted to kick things off, just maybe, going around and talking about what your reactions were to the book, or what your reactions are to what you perceive the book to be about, if you haven't read it. So if anybody wants to jump in, go for it.
I will just start and be honest. I had trouble getting into this book. I didn't make it all the way through it. Even like just the first forward or whatever the first pre-chapter is, I could tell that she was like making fun of how certain cities were, maybe not making fun, but like she felt like she was making a point about how cities were obviously designed wrong, and I wasn't picking up on it because I think I'm so trained by how cities are designed and how like we have that mentality that this is how cities designed, and that's like how I was approaching it. And so I think her point was well made, because she's right. I don't understand necessarily all of the problems with it. And so for that, I kind of missed some of her key points. So I think I will have to definitely do like a reread after I make through the first time, because I'm not quite picking up on the things that she feels are obviously wrong.
Thanks for your honesty. I will add in just some of the my key takeaways, particularly from the beginning of the book too. Like one of the things I think she does really well is pick out the mythologies that underlie how we view planning. If you've ever played SimCity, it's like, okay, zone the residential here, zone the commercial there, and then zone the industrial here. And just kind of she deconstructs where those like ideas came from, which just came out of like 17th century or 18th century England, of this idea of a garden city where the city is bad, so we want to decentralize. So there's these independent communities that are all kind of self-sufficient and everything's perfectly organized everywhere. And the second mythology I think they talk about is the Radiant City, which came out, I think, like France, and like this idea of building everything huge, skyscrapers, basically like a super urban kind of garden city where everything is like, here's all of our cultural buildings, and here's all the residential skyscrapers, and here's the industry. And it kind of like, and kind of how those ideas were built on hubris, the hubris that this is how things should be to like designers. Like, and they, in the beginning, they talk about her battle with Robert Moses, which was one of the biggest like developers in New York City, who kind of underlined the big highway projects and the like the public housing projects that they were building at the time, like demolishing whole neighborhoods that they called slum clearance, which was definitely like a racially targeted as well as like economically targeted strategy. But basically that all this like doesn't actually work in real life, and that real like diversity in economies don't come from homogeneous organizing, but they come out of like the existing communities have a life of their own and have solutions that they've created themselves through networks of relationships that only form if there's not a bunch of intervention. So I think that kind of like, even with thinking about our work in the Community Land Trust, it like helped me like slow down some of the thinking I was thinking and say, well, actually, what's already existing in communities, it's not about coming in and solving or coming up with a solution where there's a little village and it has like houses, and then there's like really trying to slow down and think, what is the inherent value that already exists in communities and how to support that, rather than come in with a grand plan that will fix things.
Yeah, and I think this book is definitely, I think that she hits a lot more on points about urban design more so than urban planning, in terms of like her concept of, you know, eyes on the street. You know, there's a lot of, she has a real problem with parks. And to me, it's really interesting because, you know, like, you know, we're always thinking, you know, we need more parks, like we need, you know, green spaces for people. But she really believes that parks are or can be a place for crime, because there is not necessarily these eyes on the street. There's not these people that know what's going on, watching what's going on, who can, like, you know, raise a flag or you know contact the police, or make sure that those people like that are doing things are safe. So for those of us that have maybe lived in more urban environments, I'm just curious if anybody else had like any thoughts about this like eyes on the street concept of, you know, does the way that our cities are designed, does that impact safety in terms of building community? Like, are those two things connected?
And Jeb, right before we hop into that, we had Wahid and David join us. Do y'all want to do your quick check-in? How you feeling today, 1 to 10? If today were color, what color would be, and the coolest place you've ever visited?
Oh, hey guys. Okay, here I go. Hey y'all. So I can hop in. So Wahid Ahmed, Indianapolis Foundation. Color, I'm feeling like an aquamarine blue today. Let's say I'm a 7. Coolest place I visited. That's a really interesting question. I would say was Khartoum, Sudan, right on the Nile River. It was incredible.
Sweet.
Say 7 Forest Green, and probably Australia. My wife's family's Australian, so I've been there a few times.
Nice. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Wild Style. I think you were going to say something in response to Jeff.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I don't necessarily agree with all of those assertions about parks, but I do think that intentional design and designing communities where you know, interaction is pushed and people can interact with each other in pleasant ways, and also see what's going on. I think like Lockfield Gardens was intentionally designed so that all the playgrounds could be seen by at least 2 of the buildings at one time, and that, you know, that was an accountability measure that nobody was out there by themselves for too long. The kids couldn't get to acting up without somebody seeing them, and somebody couldn't come in there and do anything without being seen. So, I mean, I think there is some validity to it. I don't know if the way it's being described, there is a bit extremist. I think my issue with green spaces is a lot of them are non-functional. Like, just because you have grass out there doesn't mean that there's any type of way for human beings to interact with nature in that type of way. So, you know, kind of a mix. I don't think I don't disagree. I don't necessarily agree with everything that was said.
Don, do you have any insights from Cape Town? Maybe just like the way that the community was there.
Yeah, I think just traditionally, Black areas, because our homes were so small and had virtually no land, I guess the bit of pockets of green space was so that we could at least get out of our homes where we were 4 or 5 families living in, small spaces. And so traditionally, not having a backyard and a front yard, you appreciated the park because that's where you went. But in the same vein, it was also recreation for the community. So if you were a smoker, and that's where you went to go get your smoke on. If you were a drug user, that's where you go and do your drugs. So just again, tying it back to historically how Black neighborhoods were planned, designed. It was not necessarily to, give us much space to do anything. And so those things had to kind of coexist. I can remember as a child playing soccer on the same field that after 5 in the evening, the gangsters would, use the same park to do their gang warfare, trade, and whatever went on there. So just mentioning that to say that sometimes it's a product of those same racial and gentrification and all of that. So traditionally, we did not have backyards and front yards, and the park was really central to everything, good and bad. So that's just my 2 cents.
So, does anybody have any thoughts about how the death and life of great American cities and maybe some of these concepts, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, that Jane Jacobs talks about, how that relates to some of the things that are going on in Indianapolis right now, whether it be 6570, the South Split, the land trust, new development. Yeah, really anything.
I want to say something in terms of organic growth of cities. So how there's no design element, there's no planning element. It's just people occupy space, and organically the city takes form. And probably talking more historical for the United States, whereas this is still very current in places like Africa. People still live in informal settlements where they build their own shack, and it's built either along a highway, or next to public transportation, or close to waterways, and I drive past, I come on Washington Street, and right next to the Justice Center, there's a homeless camp. And I'm thinking, okay, there's people that have just settled there, and this is their home, right? And so how do that evolve into a city starting to grow because people just gather there, and it's safe. It's close downtown, so just really making me think in terms of the book as well, as we're trying to understand the design and the planning that went into, cities, but what about the fact that it might have been organically just came about because it's either close to work or close to a mine or close to whatever it might be.
Thanks, Dawn. And also, Robert, thanks for joining us. Robert, you want to do a quick check-in? We're doing how you're feeling today, 1 to 10. Today we're color. What color would it be? And where's the coolest place you've ever visited?
Okay. Wasn't expecting to jump in, but that's fine. Just listening for lunch. 1 to 10, I think today I'm probably a 10. Everything's going well and enjoying life a little bit. I have no car, so I'm stuck at home. So that's a wonderful thing. I don't have to run around the city at all. Color today is probably turquoise blue. Just returning from the Caribbean and just loving that color and how great it made me feel during vacation. And what was the last one?
That was the coolest place you've ever been. That might be
Coolest place I've ever been. Coolest place I've ever been. I don't know. I mean, so many cool places for so many cool reasons. Probably, I really enjoyed the pyramids down in Mexico, outside of Mexico City. Just going through that set of pyramids that was there and actually climbing the pyramids and imagining some of the sci-fi movies I watched in my life and enjoying just being there. I think that's probably my best trip. Plus it was with my daughter, so that's always fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Robert. And we did have Bobby join us too. Bobby, you're in the middle of the discussion, but we'd love for you to check in. Just your name and how you're feeling today, 1 to 10. Today we're color. What color would it be? And where's the coolest place you've ever visited?
Hello, everybody. My name is Bobby Ma. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. I think you said why I wanted to participate. Is that what you said?
I know it's like how you're feeling today, 1 to 10. And if
Oh.
your color, what color would it be? Just like your mood or whatever. And then the coolest place you've ever visited.
Well, it's kind of cloudy today. When it's cloudy, I always feel some type of way, I don't never feel in my highest percentile when it's cloudy. But my favorite color is pink. And I think Nepal is one of the coolest places I've been a couple of times. It's the people there are very family oriented. The food is natural and fresh, but I'm not gonna say it's like it got its downsides too. But yeah, it's a wonderful place. If you ever get to travel, Nepal would be a wonderful place to go. Anything else?
Oh, that's it. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Glad to be here.
So we're talking a little bit about, Don talked about the organic way that cities and communities kind of form. Before that, we were kind of wanting to dive in a little bit about like how this book relates to maybe some things that are going on in Indianapolis, whether it be the reconstruction of 6570 or any other neighborhood redevelopment, new development, or just concepts maybe we should be thinking of as we continue our individual respective works that we do in Indianapolis.
Well, I would be curious of what y'all think about one of the things she talks about that is an ingredient of diversity, the ability for there to be spontaneous diversity in life in a community and neighborhood, is the idea of the presence of old buildings. So older buildings are by nature more affordable to rent space in, whether it's a business or even a residential too. And that really creates space for not just a singular demographic to live and work in a community. So I guess how would you see how we are doing that or failing to do that? I mean, I think a lot of the development maybe is focused on new development and the idea that new is better. But I guess how do you see that, potentially impacting how we think about what it means to support communities to develop themselves?
I think for me,
Question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt. I'm just sharing from a personal perspective. I think when they do these infrastructure bills, there's a lot of lingo that the average common person doesn't understand, and they know that, and that's why they do that. But the actual housing development people understand it, or a big corporate conglomerate understands it, so they know how to tap into those dollars. Where we're left, the average person, probably qualify. We won't be able to access that until it's too late, because of the trickle down method that they have is not really making it to us. So, they use one person or two people as that token person to show that they've helped with these kind of these bills that have infrastructure that goes to like communities, and I just learned about this by going to another meeting, that these infrastructure bills have, we really control that. The community controls that, but we don't know that we control that. And we are left in the blind side of it. So I think finding more ways to create the recognition for the community to know that the access is there, and a fast track way to access that, and not having to go through tedious steps or a whole lot of paperwork that we may not have already together, or something like that can cause us to lose discouragement or stuff like that. So I think if we develop a better format to get this information, I think that we could utilize it better, and we could do more in our community, and not feel like the community is just being bought up by every different conglomerate, because that's what you see. You see a company coming in and they buying it up, and they know something we don't know. Whether it's they know how to access the money, or they know how to access the grants, or whatever it is, they know it. So we need to know that too. So that's kind of my input. Thank you.
Thank you. For real.
I think one of the bigger problems is, particularly I guess along Washington Street, and so a lot of those older buildings have already been lost. Like you're left with, over decades, we had used car lots came in and they tore down existing buildings that were office buildings. And I've seen several of them come down since I've been here. So yeah, it is kind of nice having some of those existing smaller scale commercial spots in your communities for people to take advantage of. But a lot of locations, not as any part of grand design, but just kind of neglect. In a lot of cases, a lot of them have just been torn down from neglect. Yeah, I think one of the things we learned, like whether or not you have the tools or not to do it, like controlling the land is probably more important than anything. Like, I mean, if you have, particularly before development gets to you, controlling your neighbor, controlling the ownership of the land is a good thing to do before the development ever gets there.
Yeah, and I think like going back to older buildings, I mean, just to piggyback off what y'all were saying, like I think the disinvestment in those buildings is a sign of the general disinvestment in the communities that those buildings are situated in, right? And I think that when you can see like an older building that's healthy, that's had attention, you can that goes to show that that neighborhood in general has had attention and had care, and kind of it just is a signal like where priorities are for the powers that be that we control those things.
Yeah, I think one of the like just natural difficulties with older buildings is the wear over time and whether they have seen the upkeep that they need because we have so many older homes that you see maybe vacant or abandoned and they're to the point where they've been neglected for whatever reason for a period of time and they may just be easier to knock down than to keep up. And I think that that's just so unfortunate because obviously if you can get that building to be habitable or usable as a space, that's so much usable space that we can add to our supply. But again, it's just bottom line thinking here. Sometimes it is less expensive to knock it down than to rehab it. And that's just a really harsh reality in a lot of cases. And it's sad. I would love to see, a little bit more what other people are thinking in terms of how we can maybe combat that because the homes that we're building now, in 50 years time, if owners or cities or whoever aren't keeping those properties up, the same thing will just keep happening. And so we'll see this like cyclical effect of every 50 years or so, the properties we're building today will then be, could become in those conditions as well. And so it'd be really interesting to kind of figure out what the best approach is to try and keep, the yearly maintenance necessary for those buildings up so that we don't have to continually be tearing things down or rebuilding. We can continue to grow and, not have to rebuild on the same land over and over, but we can focus on expanding and addressing some of these needs for additional housing and additional space.
I think this raises a really good point about like what exactly is an old building, right? So like some of the adaptive reuse projects that are going on downtown, like with some of the former office buildings, while maybe not designed in, the most aesthetically pleasing ways of, actual true historic buildings. I still think, it's fantastic to see some of the work that's being done, like on the Gold building and possibly like the City County building to, save resources and maybe cut down on development costs and aid in affordability in an area that could be high demand for living and maybe help satisfy some of that demand, citywide. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's a good point for other neighborhoods as well. Like what exactly is an old building? Marshes are a big like. What are we going to do with all of these closed grocery stores, right? I know that's a conversation over in Irvington right now in that the Irvington Washington Street Plaza there. So yeah, I guess it still maybe holds true today in terms of the most sustainable building may be one that already exists.
Yeah, I think some thought needs to be put into place for how to make some of the older properties more accessible. That's like one of the big issues with some of like, these buildings that are beautiful and people want to retain like how they originally designed. But, our population is aging and the more people need those accessibility features and we want these buildings to be, usable by as many people as possible. And so accessibility is a really limiting factor in a lot of cases for some of these older buildings that didn't necessarily design for those features to begin with, because accessibility is 10 times more expensive to add on after the fact instead of just designing it into the building to begin with.
Wild Style, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think definitely, our varying definitions of old buildings kind of affect what we're seeing and what we're talking about. Like in Indianapolis, in my neighborhood, I mean, they've torn down most of the commercial buildings, and there's not, we're fighting to save what's left for that. But if you go out to Lafayette Road, you got a whole mall that's been a bastion of entrepreneurship. You know, and that building is 50 years old. That is an old building. Um, a lot of the businesses along, you know, West 38th Street are, you know, in buildings that are 40 and going on 50 years old. And that's also, you know, it's international marketplace, and it's given a lot of immigrants and minorities a chance to have lower rent and launch their businesses that unfortunately we don't get to do as much in the center city. But I think, you know, during the time of, you know, when we're talking about 50 years ago, I think that's part of the reason is that the buildings we had were only, you know, 50 to 70 years old back then, and now after this much disinvestment, they're gone. So it is cyclical, and we really do need to look at, you know, not letting all our physical infrastructure deteriorate before deciding to go do something, or that we need economic development and, you know, and affordable rents, you know, for not just for people that are starting businesses, but, you know, people that actually live around the businesses.
So I think this is super timely to keep in mind because I know in some of my urban planning circles that I run in, it's kind of come up recently that like, you know, Jane Jacobs is basically like the original NIMBY, right? But not in my backyard. You know, she was opposing a highway that was going to destroy a bunch of, you know, housing and old buildings and parks. So maybe it was a NIMBYism in a good sense. But you know, today I know that it's you know, it's kind of a hot button issue that so many of our projects and, you know, the affordability crisis is exacerbated by NIMBYism and the planning process. And so it's sort of this like catch-22 of, you know, we want to engage people, but then elevating the voices of people that are inhibiting, you know, housing development. You know, for example, a housing development over in Broad Ripple was stopped a couple months ago because of outcry from neighbors, and those people were basically saying that you know, these townhomes and, you know, this area that is in high demand would create too much traffic for their street. It would become dangerous, and then the project eventually failed. And so now there's, I don't know, 400 less units in Broad Ripple that, you know, people are able to live in. And while that's not affordable housing, you know, it's still something that seeks to satisfy demand. So I'm interested if anybody has any thoughts about this sort of like catch-22 that the planning process is in terms of like how it relates to Jane Jacobs and, you know, what sort of some of our more prevalent situations in Indianapolis.
Just speaking out loud about that. You know, I think the whole idea of the NIMBYism is probably a big problem, which we actually encourage ourselves with the development of highways and coming through neighborhoods and finally giving folks a say so on what's going on. But I think at a point it just goes too far because there has to be a certain amount of planning for cities of where products are going, how products are aging. And when we build a house, we don't build a house to last 100 years. Typically, we built it to last 50 years. And without major investments in those units, you just can't, you can't keep it up. And so you're dependent upon the economic viability of the area in order to maintain it. And when we talk about the NIMBYism piece, I mean, that actually prevents you from actually helping to develop a community and giving it the housing that it needs. And I mean, I don't know how you begin to solve this problem without going out into a cornfield and developing brand new housing, because, you know, I've been in community development for the last 35, 40 years. Even in Philadelphia, we developed housing and picked up commercial spaces. But the city of Indianapolis, back in the 80s and 90s, refused to rehab large buildings, refused to build multifamily housing. They only wanted single family housing. And we tried to explain to them that this was not going to satisfy the need going forward. And so now we're backed into a corner where land becomes an issue. And I mean, as we was talking about those older buildings are prime places where we can do additional housing at a reduced cost and should be doing so. But again, who has the money? Who has the control? As David was saying, who has land control? And without that, you really can't do much at all. So I mean, it's a situation I think we're going to have to grow past at some point. And I think, City County Council and others are beginning to see that. I just hope it's not too late.
I think Bobby, you wanted to say something too.
Yeah, and I just piggyback off of what the other guy just said. It's really a challenge to, I think it's a pro and a con, because everywhere I'm looking now, I'm seeing apartment sky rises. That's what I'm calling them, because they just, when there was an empty location, now you just see a sky rise of apartments everywhere, so I think they're building, but it's like you said, the traffic's going to increase. Like, I live on College, and people drive up and down College like it's the Indy 500, and I have children. So, it's just a lot of areas that they increase the bike lanes everywhere, So you increase the bike lanes, you build all these apartments up. Now you're building all this traffic buildup and things that you want to make courtesy to pedestrians. But it's like, you got to look at the overall, especially when you're in an inner kind of city and not like an open grand city, that you got locations to build out. So it's when you don't have any money, it's a conversation you're not invited to, And I think that's why we, when we come together as a small voice, using certain, organizations to be the megaphone to these kind of companies that are buying up, and just to the city to hear what we have to say, that's when we can lean in and let our voice be heard on the things that we know that the community that you're living in needs, and not just what a developer thinks it needs, So maybe there needs to be a point place for the community to reference community development issues, that are the pros and the cons of doing that, so we can move in a efficient way where we move together as a one voice, and not just, mad because we just got another building put as an eyesore in our community, So, because I'm really trying to figure out where all these people are going to come from, because they've built so many apartments in the inner city now, like in the last 10 years. But these apartments are not at 100% capacity. So I'm just trying to figure out how they're going to fill this up. And it's just I'm just observing right now just to see what happens. And I want to play, but I don't know how to play, and I don't know what kind of money it takes to play. So I'm just like observing and learning so I can, do my part and make sure that I'm, I didn't get missed over or looked over in the process. So.
Yeah, and that's I think, great points. And I did want to come back because I think it ties into, Bobby, what you said earlier, which is really about a lot of the funding sources and dollars, whether it's public, federal, city, state, flow often to a small number of institutions, and particularly those who have access, whether it's relational access or knowledge access, knowledge about all these programs and the capacity and staff and lawyers in order to comply with all the requirements. So I guess on the, and I'll relate it back also to the the Death and Life of Great American Cities, I think what she advocates for really is development of communities from the bottom up. And is it possible, and do we see any opportunities to shift the power of where resources are invested from the top down to more bottom up? So I don't know if you all have any thoughts on opportunities to do that.
I really want. I mean, I so appreciate Kheprw for like convening the space because I think that like chances to just like knowledge share like this are super critical. And so I think like more of this would, you know what I mean? I think would be such a huge asset if we can multiply the space. You know, um, I do wonder like if like what it would take to have like a community ambassador voice like in every kind of decision making or multiple community voices, right? In every decision making um, body that the city has. Um, because I think that like again like you have to have money in order to or have to at least represent a large amount of money in order to like kind of be at these decision making tables. But that doesn't guarantee your expertise, right? In terms of community development or just in terms of what the community needs and feels. And so I don't know. I just wonder what that would take to in order to enact something like that, right? Like what would it mean for DMD to have community ambassadors, right? That inform its work and like has like a um, an accountability measure built into it as well. I don't know.
I disagree that we need a lot of money. We need more organization than we need money. And again, I would just push on it. I mean, communities when they have organization, individuals can do a little bit, but communities when they organize, you can pull your funds to acquire land and property, which that gives you the ability either to block development or to do development. Like I mean, sometimes development is getting that missing piece that doesn't allow if you don't want a particular type of development and you're having that parcel of land right in the middle of right in the middle of a larger parcel may actually you can serve as a spoiler as well. So like I think having organization and knowing the connections of where I mean I think when we started we had no connection. We know not much money at all, but we made a lot of connections and stuck our nose in a lot of things. But yeah, I think the organization is much more important than the money.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, David. And sorry if I wasn't clear. I meant that people with money or people that represent money are invited to the table in order to make those decisions. And so, you know, you definitely can, with organizing power, combat that. But just having the money or representing that or some money, you just get invited to tables.
Well, I'll go for it.
Yeah, I think I would. I guess I play devil's advocate. I'd say advocate for the community getting the money. I think that's looking at what's going on in Riverside. That's the main difference because developers sure aren't organized, and they're not competently building homes either, or getting deadlines met or meeting the criteria that they set forth. So I think really a lot of it is directly resources. I think communities are left in the lurch, and the people with the money keep the money. They come in and they're seen as experts simply because they have access to money. But when we're looking around, I mean, historically, we're looking around, and it's pretty much the developers and the realtors who created redlining and gave the federal government worked with them to create those policies. Then we manufactured our own housing shortages here. As Robert was talking about, city government didn't build a lot of that stuff because they were under pressure from the realtors to only do single family housing because that upped their commission levels, because single family houses, you get more out of them per sale than you would you know, if people were living in condos and denser housing blocks. And so, yeah, when I look at it, I'm the devil's advocate. I'm gonna say no, the community just needs money because we've been disorganized and we've disorganized ourselves into a housing crisis with all these supposedly organized experts.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Wasta. I think I'll take it a point a little bit further than that. I think it goes a little bit deeper, and that is when we're talking about neighborhoods, even like Riverside and Martindale, Brightwood, we have situations where people have owned their houses for generations, but are still not able to get the resources necessary to pick them up, to fix them up, to get new roofs and to do the other things that's necessary. Nor are they getting the talents and skills necessary to think about development on land that they own. You know, I've developed houses in Martindale, Brightwood, and other places around the city. And the one thing that I'm always running into is people with land, not in control of land and not being able to develop it because they're simply not considered for the resources necessary to pick it up. So when we think about community changing, we can think about, you know, larger groups pooling money together, but we can't pool nearly the money we need in order to work our way out of this crisis. I mean, it's just not possible. It's going to take a concerted effort from the bottom up and from the top down to create enough units to start to meet this crisis. And what we're seeing now is that money's flowing in now simply because they're creating housing for upper income group, for a more affluent home buyer or condo buyer, or in our case in Indianapolis, renter, more affluent renter. And we just, and that's where the money's at. I mean, you can't make houses for low income people without having the same amount of money it takes to build, to buy the supplies for upper. It just doesn't happen. You have to have gap financing, and we simply don't have enough of those dollars around in order to really begin to dive into this issue.
Go for it, Dawn.
Yeah, and this probably goes back to the co-op discussion that we just recently had, and I had typed in there to look at the case study for the People's Housing Process. The People's Housing Process was a savings co-op where the community comes together and 50 cents, that's all, 50 cents a month is what each neighbor contributes to the savings co-op. And the money that is collected in the savings co-op is then matched either through government or other entities. And then that fund is used for anything that the community needs, whether it's fixing homes, you know, whatever is missing in the community, which is really a big thing in South Africa, but it also kind of took off through the rest of Africa. During COVID, they used the savings co-op to actually save money towards food parcels and anything else that the community needed during COVID. So I say that sometimes we all wait for the government to do something, but our community can be very resilient if you know, if you just sell these kind of concepts to them to say, hey, we have X amount of people still in their home. If we can, you know, do the savings co-op, there will be a pool of money for that. And then just to put, you know, on the flip side of that, also in South Africa, seen where areas are where government are collecting property taxes, but are not, you know, doing their job in terms of potholes and collecting garbage and just keeping the community together. I've seen communities actually pay their taxes into an escrow account. And then out of that escrow account, they are actually getting bids and stuff to do their own, you know, potholes, cut their own grass, collect their own trash. So this is just the the militant South African speaking here in terms of how in countries where there's lack of resources and lack of government action, you know, communities have taken at least the approach of helping themselves to get over these things. And I really want to hear the message in terms of we need to communicate and teach the community how to take their power back so that they can be ultimately the decision makers as to what comes into the community, who's coming in. I mean, there is like 5-star apartment buildings in South Africa that nobody will move into because the government didn't check with the community. Those investors built it and nobody's moving in because there was not a process followed where the community was consulted. So again, just taking that message back to our communities that you are ultimately the decision maker and the people in government works for you. So I'm gonna stop there.
So I think we're at time, but I just want to say thank you guys so much for jumping on. I really enjoyed the conversation. And then if you want, want to continue the conversation, just reach out to anybody here. And I mean, I would be more than happy to keep talking, or I'll volunteer Alvin too, I guess. So.
And we do have another one in 2 weeks. It's the evening session, 5 p.m. So you're welcome to come back for part 2. And also, I think next month is it the Color of Law.
I think so.
That's
Yeah.
the book.
Yes, I'll be on.
So I think that
I'll be
definitely
on
relates
a couple
to
of
some of the things that we touched on today about the disinvestment in communities, particularly along the lines of race, and how that in some ways, like Robert said, even if we pulled all our resources, it would be insufficient because there is a structural problem with how the society was intentionally set up in this way. But I do want to not lose Don's point about the ability to come together. And again, that goes back to organizing what David said. We have to organize, and at the same time, folks who have the power and the resources have to be able to build those bridges so that those resources, and again, I'm not sure if this is really how the system is meant to be set up, and there are forces and interests that are counter to this. But again, that just talks about if we want to make that happen, we have to be organized and have the relationships and have the knowledge to be able to fight for it. So, thanks everybody for coming out. This was a really great conversation. Bobby, thanks for joining us. Robert, Wild Style, everybody here.
Yeah, thanks for hosting us.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Hey, Don. Is Don still there?
Yeah, Don's still here. And we'll leave it open for a second. I'll stop there for it.
Okay.